Yes, let's go. Let's do it.
So, thank you very much, Axel, for joining us today. Axel Becerra is Dean of Architecture at University of Michoacán. He did his PhD in architecture at Sheffield in the United Kingdom. His postdoc research in urbanism at the Harvard GSD, and is now providing extensive research for students to work on PhDs, postdocs, masters, undergraduate research in collaboration with countless locales and communities across Michoacán, Mexico, and the world. He has designed numerous buildings around Mexico, integrating materiality and process tectonics through social process and refinement of aesthetic sensibility. Born and raised in Morelia, Michoacán, he has also done extensive work with the government in Michoacán in terms of participatory planning. One of his agencies at the university, the Territorial Research Lab, is pushing novel ways of seeing urbanism across space and time, often innovating traditional and local technologies in modeling, site and community understanding, and global systems. Together, they're working on global migration, health, alienation, and critique of notions of landscape and urbanism in terms of ideas of developed and undeveloped, critiquing those ideas. He's one of the world's thought leaders in design, and the University of Michoacán is the first to offer a Doctor of Design in Latin America. So go ahead and take it away, Axel, and I'll just follow up with some questions after a bit.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Alan, and thank you for your school for this invitation. Hopefully I can meet you soon in life, but meantime, I think this is a good alternative, even with all these technical issues. Well, today I really would like to share a little bit of the work that we've been developing here in Morelia, Mexico. Maybe people is wondering, where is Morelia? And the only thing that I can say is probably that Morelia and Michoacán is the place where all the avocados are coming to the US. Maybe that could be a good reference to start. Well, it's here where we have, I've been working in the Universidad Michoacana. Universidad Michoacana is at the moment one of the top 10 universities in Mexico, and is at the moment has more than 50,000 students. So it's one of the oldest universities in Latin America. And the Faculty of Architecture at the moment is already 2,500 students. And we have 5 different programs. We have undergrads, we have postgrads, we have master, we have PhDs. And the school has been launched at the moment, the first doctor in design in Latin America. So I think that could be one of the interesting issues about Morelia. So it's here in this university where we are working, and normally we have different theories about how to practice architecture. However, in Morelia, and even though after all these different studies abroad, I think coming back to Mexico was a big challenge, and especially to try to acknowledge how the cities have been developed. And in Mexico, most of our cities have been developed by common people, by everyday people, and in different barrios, in different areas, in different favelas, etc. So it's here where our context, we call it the city of paradoxes. And maybe you remember, Alan, all these discussions when we were together at the GSD. And Mexico, and especially Morelia, and I'm talking about these paradoxes because you have developments that probably could be near to California, all these suburban areas with golf camps and with lovely forests. But at the same time, Morelia has all this other kind of development, a huge amount of social housing that is developed in the edges of the cities. And at the same time, you have both together. So it's here where we have these discussions of nodes of all these kind of paradoxes where you can have one next to the other. And what really means this is that sometimes you have one of the richest guys in the world living in Mexico, and sometimes you have this kind of development that is this relationship between the abundance and the scarcity at the same time. So you have all these kind of luxurious zones of Santa Fe, as example in Mexico City, but at the same time you have other areas that could be compared with some human development index of some of the poorest countries in Africa. So it's here where our context became more interesting, especially Frida Kahlo, since she was doing her paintings, was arguing about this relationship between the rational, the mystical, between the modern, between the westernized, between all these different counts. So it's here where all these ancient pre-Columbian traditions still exist alongside contemporary westernized lifestyles. And it's here where you normally get confused between the rational, the mystical, and in other words, you can be living around all these modern and ancient aspects of Mexico at the same time. And as another example, you will find a lot of suburban areas that are part of the development. And it's here where you keep all this kind of unfinished spectrum of feelings that could go from the most beautiful to the most criticized. So it's where in these places you can find all these developments, but normally what happened in Mexico is that you have these mini Berlin walls that divide the same territory. And it's inside these walls where you can have all these bubbles of speculation. And on the other side, you have the walls outside, and it's there where the service people is going to be part of the everyday life. So here is where you find developments that ironically are called the paradise. And all these developments have been growing by the force of the everyday people. And it's here where you can find all these different speculation. And here is where you find that this mini wall divides the communities between 10 times of speculation. So inside the wall, you can find the square meter around $150, but outside it could go to $15. And it's this kind of policies that divide the communities, but at the same time, this division means also a different human development index just across this wall. So sometimes you would like to go inside to these communities, wall communities. The issue is that you also need almost a kind of passport. So the issue became more interesting because all these different ways of urban development also consume different amount of resources. And also these two communities have a different way of adopting the mobility, consumption, lifestyle, and it's how you have all this duality. So as example, you can have like a housing that could get a LEED certification, etc., but it's full of all these devices that anyway consume a lot of energy. And on the other hand, you could have all this basic housing that even when it is not certified is part of this limitation to resources that of course that the consumption is going to be completely minimal. And Saskia Sassen explains a lot all this kind of discussion and how the model of globalization is really emphasizing this development of these two areas. So it means that in our cities, you have part of the city living inside this bubble, and you have other part of the city that is outside the bubble. So it's inside the bubble where you have like the formal processes of development that could be compared with your country, but it's outside these bubbles where you have all this other way of development. And more or less in Mexico, sometimes the housing stock produced formally is less than the one that is being produced informally. So here is the context where normally banks, developers, architects are always willing to be part of these traditional processes. Is here where you have the abundant city, or the city with abundance, and of course, it is inside these communities where you have the formal architecture. And you have the other part of the city. Our cities in Mexico, you have sometimes more than 50% of the city that has been developed by traditional vernacular, by informal modernism, and some kind of hybridity, the picture in the middle, where the government provides the basic house that is really, really basic. It's one room, one bedroom, and people keep developing by their own needs. So you have all this other stock that at the end of the day create this kind of landscape, the landscape on one side, the abundant city, and in the other side, you have the scarcity, or the city with a lot of precarity. This way, our context for architecture also give you two different opportunities. And today, I really would like to focus this presentation more on what our students are trying to do in the scarcity, not only in the abundant city. So our school, in this way, of course, that train our students to perform in the abundant city. However, because the other 50 or more % of the city is being developed informally, of course, that our students also are trying to be ready and more recently are trying to get involved in the other side of the city. So in this way, if you really would like to know more about it, well, you can read a lot about it, about this traditional of this understanding of this phenomenon that could be very common for people in India, in Brazil, in Colombia, in all Latin America. But it's very interesting to acknowledge the new kind of understanding, the renewed understanding of this kind of, this other way of doing the city by Homi Bhabha, who explained the difference between the pedagogical and the performative, and also Rahul Mehrotra in Harvard talking about the static and the kinetic. The kinetic trying to refer this informality as places that are more dynamic and are more democratic in certain ways. So after developing my PhD and postdoc, always you are wondering, okay, what can be the architect role at this other scarcity? So in this way, always you speculate about ways to facilitate, to inform, to consult, to negotiate, and to design. So design became like an opportunity to really do a little bit more than the traditional. And in this way, also we created a small provocation to our students, where the role of the architect is more to become like an agent that arrives to different places and is full of new tools to really operate in this challenging of developing design with the scarcity of resources, with local knowledge. And sometimes all this looks very romantic. So sometimes we were making fun that all these kids could be arriving in a limousine, for example, in the US, or could be arriving in a submarine in Russia, etc., in UK, of course. But more than this joke, the most interesting issue was when we were coming back to Mexico, and we were thinking, well, we are arriving, coming back. So in 2012, after doing all these studies, the first thing that we were doing is that we were kind of consultants of our friends, and it was through this do all this team suggesting that probably could be developed a kind of different processes of design. So it was working with Alfonso Garduño in another city in Querétaro, that is 2 hours ago from here, where we first arrived to a small school, and we developed this little intervention for students that was developed by a very basic recycling materials on the floor, and also with another kind of material that we were just getting from the area. So this was a kind of a small area for students to chill out and relax. And as you can see, probably the more expensive part of the structure was the steel structure. The rest was taking advantage of the lovely tree, and also we were getting recycling materials around, and of course the working force were part of the students. So from here we start like a small theory, and you can see here the students now enjoying this little area where they were having the little break of the everyday classes. So it's here where we were taking these processes a little bit more serious. And of course, we did all these urban studies that every student normally develop, trying to understand the city. But probably the most interesting thing is what we call it the territorial social, or the social territory. As you can remember at the beginning, we were trying to make visible all these people that is part of the everyday development. So what we we're trying to understand is that all the city has social networks, and you can see the letter A, so you normally can identify these networks. However, in letter B, when you put the red dot, it's like all these theories about urban acupuncture, that when you try to work with one network, then in letter C, there are new networks that became part of this movement. And this normally happens in all this kind of informal city. It's part of the DNA. So as this example, well, we were working together with a community in a classical recycling meeting room. And from there, we keep developing, working with them. We were identifying a small plot. And as you can see, then there was another network and more networks until we were having like all this social territory well identified. After this identification, we selected the territory, and of course that the main area for continuing consolidated this territorial network was to develop by donations a community center. And of course, always our students are part of these processes, also developing the local material. But in this case, of course, that there were students from the UK also taking part in a summer, like many times. And of course that these processes included the development of the material, or the construction, recycling of concrete. So you can see in the floor all the recycling. In the bottom, you can see all these cement test, concrete test that were donated. So many of these things were part of the donations, and then you can have all this little thing that was made like a cover that was developed in a very basic stuff, basic way. Of course, that we take advantage of the weather in Mexico. We don't need cooling, we don't need heating. You can have a very open, and this became our first experiment of interaction with the community. Of course, that you have all these lovely photos, but maybe the most interesting thing beyond even a small announcement about this project was all these economic activities that were around this community center. So little cooperatives, of course, that a kitchen was a key in order to develop all this kind of social network that became like the node to keep pushing forward all this community. Of course, that this place became a a place for parties, a place for etc., etc. And after that, we developed a small chapel for us, where a small place that at the beginning was part of the chapel, but later became part of the Zumba classes, etc., etc. So it's all these little artifacts and all these kind of possibilities that then we were trying to theorize a little bit this in order to understand what we call the informal means challenge. How there are a lot of lessons in this network, in this landscape, that the key issue is that the new role of the architect became like more organic. And in this way, you became like the networker that is like, well, in this case, it was more in 2015 when we were also applying all these kind of methodologies in more communities. And we at the end created like another initiative, but this initiative became part of our school now, in the School of Architecture in Morelia. The other projects were part of other exercises in Querétaro. And then the main issue here is that we develop a little bit more our methodologies, and also we added another unit that we call it the territorial intelligence unit. What that is with all this knowledge, all this network that we're trying to facilitate all the information to our students in order to really operate in the territory. And maybe here is where became all this understanding about how all these communities, even without the assistance of the architects, became very organic. As you can see in this example, like Alvar Aalto were suggesting a long time ago about flexible standardization, where things became the same but open to individuality. So in the bottom, you can see social housing that after 30 years time, they became to grow, and in certain way, you can understand that informal means, in other ways, like a kind of way of flexibility. And you can question a little bit the facade, but at the end of the day, it's like playing this game of snakes and ladders, where you sometimes you have money, and what happens is that it's also flexible in financial means. So it's in certain way open to change. And I'm not trying to romanticize, is that only that these are new tools for your toolkit that you need to learn in order to operate in all in this other context. Otherwise, what happens is that the builder is going to take the job anyway. So another really interesting challenge was also working with local communities when we launched this initiative about TARU, that means Taller de Acción, like means action workshop, and is how we are trying to implement this model to our school in order to make our students confront the reality. And reality challenge you to operate sometimes on the floor, under the trees, working in a traditional ways of committee, rather than having you as an architect the control of your plans. You need to go back to basics sometimes in order to be more like the orchestra director. So in this way, the architect became more like a player in a collective action. And you can see in this photo all this community raising the hand in order to really taking collective decisions according to the local traditions. So we were sharing the basics, proposing a new kind of housing, because we were creating a new town for 70 families, because the government was trying to move and to create a migration of these families in order to develop like a big water, I don't remember the name, water for production of energy. remember?
Yeah, the hydrological dam.
Yeah, a hydraulic. So could you imagine people really trying to put a really resistant position with the government in order to really get back at least their housing? Otherwise, they could be just removed and then they don't know where happened. So normally we at the beginning we arrived with our lovely virtual rendering. Of course, that was a big mistake. At the end, we went back to the basic models and showing to the people and also acknowledging local knowledge in certain way, straightforward models like this with the plans there in order the people to understand, okay, where is my bedroom, where is my bathroom, and people in the bottom you can see how they were really this was a way of communicating the ideas rather than presenting lovely renders, clear communication. Of course, that we put all these in public domain because you cannot have an individual decision. So these kind of processes also remind us other ways of taking important decisions for the community. So on the other hand, if you compare the abundant city that promotes the individuality and the specific decisions that you need to have the control, on this hand is the opposite. You need to have public domain in order to take decisions, walk in the territory, discussing in the territory the different orientations with the people in a weather that looks like Mars, see? And if we were around 45 degrees with no cooling. So sometimes it's part of the everyday. So here is where the housing was developed. At the moment, the town is already full finished with the schools, etc., etc. And of course, that in this way, you are challenged to have new tools, new ways of understanding and envisioning new futures and trying to work with the new leaders. And as you can see, you will see different projects of our students working in different communities, really taking advantage of the local means, what is just there, and especially working with local leaders there, also working what is available, some kind of boxes for fruits, trying to act, also recycling. But with this is a certain way of opportunistic design, but not really romanticizing. People really enjoy and appreciate this way of suggestions. And of course, this was an informal intervention in a kindergarten. And this was also very political because the kindergarten was kind of developed by one party, but the new party doesn't want to use it. So all these kind of issues that makes you acknowledge that architecture is highly political at the same time. And of course, the real everyday engagement in different towns, public participation, and of course, freedom and certain way of pedagogical approaches with local people, because local people really want small little changes in order to really get legitimation. Otherwise, local communities don't trust you because always is involved with all these issues. And at the same time, different projects have been growing, including some partners with a lot of technological support like MIT. And by this, we've been developing a lot of urban projects. Probably the most important project was the new urban plan that in Mexico is called Programa de Desarrollo Urbano, that maybe a translation could be like urban development plan, that then later became a territorial law. So we were developing all this mapping and all this. At the end of the day, we got a big fund from the federal government, and we created like all this program for Lázaro Cárdenas Port, that is one of the most important ports in Latin America. and is where from this sport goes from Lázaro Cárdenas to Kansas City. So from this south to north that is linked to the US is how a lot of goods are transported. And now Lázaro Cárdenas is like the alternative to Long Beach and also Los Angeles, because those ports in the north are very busy. So you cross Mexico. So it's becoming like important. And the most interesting thing maybe at the moment also is that informal means development also biomaterials with local knowledge. Some of our students are at the moment developing all this, but with low tech, not with high tech. So maybe, of course, that as university, we're creating like new models, new business models of education linked with another academic institutions, also with local government, with federal government. So it's like a big network between US, Mexico, even to Chile with Luis Valenzuela, another interesting guy that we met in the GSD, Alan, if you remember. So maybe the most interesting thing is that the actors of all these projects are our students, and our model challenge them to really confront reality. So every day we are getting more and more commissions from different agencies, and we are putting these commissions inside the school. And because our school is very massive and is very well acknowledged locally, we having a lot of new projects. So just to conclude, I will share the last, and as you can see, the projects are in different scales from a very local communities to the urban, but maybe these are very funny because we are now also working with another project that we call crafting the digital, that in other ways means that how the digital could be crafted. Yeah, and by this issue, by this idea, we are trying to also understand our way of being sustainable, accessible, and developing our way of innovation. So, of course, that our students work locally also with communities. And this is a project by Lucia Espinosa. She was developing a small machines for people that develop a lot of craftsmanships, but she was trying to provide a small little machine like the tortilla machine in order to improve a little bit the processes until she got all these little tortilla machine that creates all these lovely patterns in small tiles, and she's trying to push a small community business in order to produce all these little tiles to introduce them in a contemporary life in a different styles of local cuisines, etc. So she's pushing all this romantic idea of the craft to a certain way of technified, or is how we call it crafting the digital. And another of our students, Javier Alvarez, he got a lot of, normally at the moment in Mexico, there are a lot of lakes with all this plant called lirio that became like a certain plaga. Alan, what means plaga? It's like you
Like
don't
an
want
algae, like there's some kind of
yeah.
algal growth on the lake.
Yeah. So in other way, people hate these plants in the lakes. He was getting this plant from the lake, processing, also creating these little machines, and also creating these tiny little things for acoustic panels, and from that little thing to all these little panels. So he at the end created a small brand producing all these tiny little things for stupid things in your desk, on your table, whatever. So anyway, he also is producing now panels for decoration, etc. So at the end of the day, my message is that looking in all these informal, designers, architects should understand all this potential that go beyond this aesthetic technique. And it's not only about forms, new materials, or new techniques. It's more about a different body of patterns and typologies that correspond to a different operational processes that could be acknowledged as an alternative future. So after being doing a big trip from Europe, then I went to the US. I've been very lucky with a lot of scholarships, traveling and studying. Coming back to Mexico, I think it's been, and especially in this area of Morelia, because also today Mexico is a big mosaic of Mexico City is one stuff, Guadalajara, Monterrey, every city now, they are doing their own stuff. So coming back to Morelia has been like a great laboratory to explore many ideas, and not only directly, of course that some have been directly, but now I think we are pushing a little bit forward our students to acknowledge those two different opportunities. So we can say three opportunities: between the abundant city, between the scarcity, between technology, between low technology. So it's all this hybridity that gives you the opportunity to open up the brain and really enjoy a little bit in different ways design and architecture. So just to conclude, I always like to put a small exercise. Hello. I think, well, anyway, I would say, yeah, I think I did, well, you already know this game that is called Thinking Outside the Box. So I think this game already gives you a small alternative that sometimes we put limits that not really exist. We sometimes create that architecture is this clean, organized, career in lovely box. But I think coming back to Mexico teach me that architecture could go farther, and you can really develop different issues beyond that. And imperfection, improvisation, there are other tools that you can use. And I just would like to conclude with a quote by Mario Schegnan, that he was immigrant in Mexico. His parents were coming from Ireland. So his quote suggesting that hybridization of cultures had been conducted to a unique way of expressions in Mexico. So in this way, design could be both global, local, technological, crafted, contemporary, abundant, scarcity. So my lesson finally is for today is this, that don't put limits that don't really exist. Thank you very much, Alan. That's it. Thank you.
Okay, so I think we have a little bit of time for questions. To me, I mean, I'm blown away by this. I think, as I said in the introduction, your work is leading the world in terms of really addressing some of the issues that are extremely important today. I love the fact that you're able to show us these differences side by side and then actually provide a methodology, an agent to transcend the two and really think about an organic architecture as a landscape and think about the role of the designer in that system. So I wonder if any students have a question. We only have minutes. Guess everyone is blown away. So I'll start. But thinking about how design is sometimes professionally done in the United States, you have to frequently work from the perspective of the formal. And then on the other side of that fence, where things are happening more organically, it's almost off limits. And I liked how in your example, you're taking students and working collaboratively from both spaces in order to grow something new. And I'm wondering, do you also see the growth and the change and the fostering of the culture in the university itself as a way of fostering a kind of like organic and both informal and formal growth of participation?
Well, I think, thank you for this question, because we formally began with the Taller de Acción in 2016. And now, after 5 years' time, is where you really began to really see other colleagues really discussing these issues. Because probably 10 years ago, our school was very, very traditional, especially coming from most of the schools of architecture in the different states of Mexico were born from somebody that came from Mexico City. So our school was born from some guys that were from the Polytechnic School of Architecture in Mexico City, that was full of acknowledging all these functional way of doing architecture. Especially this Polytechnic school in Mexico City was born in a very industrialized time of Mexico City in the 1970s, where the only important issues were housing, schools, and hospitals. So all that was the basic of our schools. And after, our school is going to be only 44 years old. So the first generations were full of functional idea of architecture, very traditional way of doing architecture. So with all these provocations, I think beyond what the colleagues said, I think our students became more aware of the different realities of the same city. Because as for that reason, I was trying to explain the context and all this idea of the city of paradoxes, because also the students became more active, became part of the social local networks. So they, beyond to having all these traditional tools that every architect needs, also I think we are adding additional tools that make them a little bit more ready for the everyday life in our context. I don't know if I answer your question.
Well, I have an additional question. Do you think students come with a sense of social responsibility to address these issues before they get to the school, or are you able to also foster that kind of mentality and awareness?
I think our university, because it's public, always has this kind of social tradition. But with this model, we are trying to really foster a little bit more, and not only in a demagogical way, but with certain tools to put this ideological idea into real action, and to contribute with local communities a little, with tiny little projects. As you can see, the presentations of the projects were sometimes very tiny, very little, but we really believe that anyway, even with those tiny little things, students are doing little contributions, but also legitimate the university, because our university is supported by public funds. So this is another thing that is very interesting. Our university is free, so the students at university don't have debts, don't have to pay, and it's supported by the local government and the federal government. So I think also it's part of the aims of the university.
I think you're a step ahead of us here in that regard, for sure. Anyone have any thoughts, questions, comments?
I got a question.
How does this compare with some of the classes on architecture and landscape that you are in?
I got a question. Dr. Santa Cruz, thank you for the wonderful presentation. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank
Okay.
you for your question. You are from India.
Yes, I'm from India. Yeah, the accent gives it away, right?
It's
So
because when I was studying, I was having a lot of friends from India.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Sometimes I used to be involved with them talking like an Indian. I was like, say, I am from Mumbai as well.
Okay, great. As long as you don't swear like them. So I just want to ask you, sir, in regarding the idea of the informal, which you mentioned, I looked at that image which you showed about the two, the dichotomy of the two existing settlements, but eventually when you did the project which showed again the individual houses on the plots on the revised layout of the plan, which was the involvement of the community, I did sense that they had an aspiration to make their houses exactly like what they saw across this road, So the question is that there's an aspiration to be like the other, but at the same time, that aspiration has certain kind of limiting or certain kind of drawbacks, which they overlook while they have something positive in their informality, So I'm trying to understand, how do you touch upon that aspect of your design through the students so that you don't lose out the communal values which are there in that informal settlement, So I just want to ask you how, because that's exactly what Kinetic City is all about, right? It's a little bit more informality, things change, people who have lower income, they cannot possibly build the entire house at one go. They have to build in parts, So I'm just trying to understand what exactly was it, how was it different when you did that design with different community, and what's going to be the final outlook of it, how it's going to be finally looking like it? Will it be more like the informal, or will it be like the formal where you have boundaries and you have, this is mine, that's yours kind of thing, but it's something which is more communal, So I'm just trying to understand what's the trajectory moving forward.
Yes, well, remind me your name.
My name is Josefa.
Josefa, okay.
Yeah.
Well, this is a big and very interesting question. That normally, of course, that theory tells you one thing, and always, and especially you also coming from India, you will acknowledge that sometimes post-colonial issues are still there. So it means that sometimes there are certain knowledge that was suppressed, and then coming back, trying to really acknowledge that there are certain local lessons that are still valid is not not really an easy an easy task, and especially in communities that, as you mentioned, are willing to be like all the communities in the front. And also to this, we can add that in rural communities, there are a lot of migration to the US. So there is not only the local aspiration, it's also the aspiration of a guy coming from California and building a Californian house with a big front and 2 or 3 cars. So I think our only position, especially to our students, is trying to give them the tool of critical thinking and really acknowledge what is really valuable in certain way, but also how all this local knowledge can be used in a contemporary way to really solve everyday challenges. And it's through all this that some of our students created also a Technified Adobe, that with this Adobe Technify, they are using in contemporary housing. So it's only by everyday examples that these tools show you them, and of course that when you go to the budget and you show these people, okay, with this technified materials, you are going to really solve your need, your basic need, But you are right. Sometimes there is always this discussion in post-colonial countries about this aspirational idea of having also one or two cars in front of your house rather than using the local transport, etc. And I think this is a big discussion of our country's everyday life. I don't know if I answered your question, but thank you.
Well,
I think you did, yeah.
well, we're actually out of time. Thank you very much for the responses, and also thank you very much, Axel, for the lecture as a whole. I think the CED will remember it for a while. So yeah, can we just have another round of applause?
But thank you all you guys for being here, and hopefully I meet you in life sometime.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.